The United States ambassador to Canada, Pete Hoekstra, has suddenly been called back to Washington for urgent meetings after abruptly cancelling a major speaking appearance in Ottawa. The timing could not be worse for the White House. This is not happening during a moment of American strength. It is happening at the exact moment Donald Trump's entire tariff strategy is beginning to collapse in front of the world. The same tariff strategy Trump sold to the American public as unstoppable. The same tariff strategy his administration claimed gave America all the leverage. The same tariff strategy that was supposed to force countries like Canada into submission is now crumbling under legal defeats, international resistance, economic pressure, and diplomatic humiliation. And suddenly, the administration that spent months talking tough is scrambling behind closed doors. That is what makes this story so explosive tonight. For months, Trump and people like HRA projected absolute confidence. They mocked Canada, they pressured Canada, they threatened Canada, they acted like Ottawa had no choice but to surrender. But now Washington is blinking first, and that changes everything. If you believe Canada standing up to pressure from Washington is one of the biggest geopolitical stories unfolding right now, make sure to subscribe to Canada Today right now. Tonight, we are breaking down how Trump's entire strategy may be unraveling in real time and why this sudden panic inside Washington could change the future of US-Canada relations forever. Thanks for joining us here on CTV News Channel. I'm Renee Rogers. We begin with breaking news. We are following reports that US Ambassador to Canada Pete Hoekstra has cancelled a planned speaking appearance in Ottawa after being called back to Washington. This news comes just over 1 hour before Hoekstra was scheduled to appear as a featured speaker at the 2026 Canada Strong and Free Networking Conference in Ottawa. Organizers say he was called back to Washington, D.C. for urgent meetings. Joining me now is CTV News U.S. political analyst. The trigger for this sudden crisis appears to be a devastating legal blow to Trump's tariffs. According to CTV analyst Eric Ham, major Trump tariffs have now been ruled unconstitutional or illegal by courts, severely limiting the White House's leverage. Think about how politically catastrophic this is. Trump's entire global strategy depended on tariffs being his weapon. That was the core philosophy. Threaten countries, pressure allies, create economic fear, and force negotiations through intimidation. That was the playbook, and for a while it worked. Many countries were afraid to escalate tensions with the United States because America was still viewed as the overwhelming economic superpower capable of inflicting massive pain. But then something changed. Countries started realizing that Trump's threats were not as unstoppable as they appeared, and perhaps no country played a bigger role in exposing that reality than Mark Carney. This is the part American media still does not fully understand. Mark Carney did not simply oppose Donald Trump. He strategically exposed him. He exposed the fact that Trump's trade war strategy depended almost entirely on fear. Fear that countries would fold, fear that economies would panic, fear that allies would isolate themselves. But Canada did something different. Canada pushed back publicly. Canada internationalized the issue. Canada reframed Trump not as a powerful negotiator, but as a destabilizing force damaging global economic trust. That was a huge shift because once countries stop fearing American pressure, Trump's leverage begins evaporating. And that is exactly what we are now seeing unfold. Even analysts in the United States are openly admitting the White House is now desperately looking for leverage. That sentence alone should send shockwaves through Washington, desperately looking for leverage. This is the same administration that claimed it held all the cards against Canada in the upcoming CUSMA review. Remember the messaging? America is bigger. America has more power. Canada cannot survive without access to the U.S. market. Canada will eventually cave. That was the narrative. But if America truly held all the leverage, why is the ambassador suddenly being recalled for urgent meetings? Why is Washington scrambling after court rulings? Why is the administration suddenly silent? Why are they panicking about losing tariff authority? Because the truth is becoming impossible to hide. The United States needs Canada far more than Trump ever admitted. And so I think what we're seeing here right now is this could possibly be the White House trying to figure out a response as we move into, of course, the CUSMA review and President Donald Trump pressing Europe on a trade agreement as well. Could this signal more tension related to those upcoming CUSMA talks? I don't know if it signals more tension. I think what it could be is the White House is now desperately looking for leverage. Remember, we got an alleged handshake deal with Europe that appears to not be moving in the direction the president wants. Now, all of his tariffs, or most of them, have been deemed unconstitutional, which leaves him with very little leverage and maneuverability. So right now, I think what we're seeing is the administration trying to figure out the way forward, especially when their hands are already tied on so many other issues. This is where the story becomes even more dangerous for Trump politically, because the White House is now trapped between three separate crises happening simultaneously. First, legal collapse. The courts are stripping away tariff powers. Second, diplomatic collapse. Countries are no longer automatically surrendering to American pressure. And third, political collapse. Trump's approval ratings are weakening while economic uncertainty continues to grow. That combination is lethal because tariffs were never just economic tools for Trump. They were political theater. They were designed to project dominance, strength, control, and power. But once courts begin dismantling those tools, once allies begin resisting openly, and once the global narrative changes, the image of dominance starts collapsing too. And that is incredibly dangerous for Trump heading into future political battles. I think right now the courts have basically stripped the president of any power on the tools he has been able to use to threaten, bully, and gain leverage in talks. So now they have to figure out what the next step is. I thought it was very surprising that in the face of this ruling, we did not get a response, and still have not, from the White House. So I think what they're doing right now is scrambling to figure out how they move forward. And to say nothing of what this means domestically for the president, who is seeing his approval ratings continue to crater as he looks ahead to the midterm elections, where it's looking more and more likely that his party will suffer a massive loss. Some people may look at this story and say, ambassadors travel back to Washington all the time. Yes, but context matters, timing matters, and panic matters. Hoekstra was scheduled to speak publicly in Ottawa and suddenly cancelled because he was called back for urgent meetings. Not routine meetings, not scheduled meetings, but urgent meetings at the exact moment Trump's tariff strategy is under attack from courts and international resistance. That is not random. It signals a White House trying to rapidly reassess its position, and honestly, they may have no good options left, because if they escalate further, they risk even more international backlash. But if they back down, they look weak after months of aggressive rhetoric. That is the trap they created for themselves. One of the biggest strategic mistakes made by Trump's team was assuming Canada would eventually crack under pressure. But they underestimated something critical. Canada adapted. Canadian leaders started diversifying relationships. Canadian public opinion hardened dramatically. And Trump's threats actually accelerated distrust toward the United States inside Canada. That may end up being one of the biggest geopolitical self-inflicted wounds in modern North American relations, because America's greatest advantage with Canada was never fear. It was trust. And once that trust started disappearing, America's leverage weakened too. Now suddenly the White House is discovering that coercion is not the same thing as partnership, and that realization appears to be hitting Washington all at once. What we are watching now is bigger than tariffs, much bigger. This is about the credibility of American power itself. Trump tried to convince the world that America could dictate terms unilaterally. But global powers, allies, courts, and markets are all beginning to push back at the same time. That creates a perception problem that spreads far beyond Canada, because once one ally resists successfully, others start believing they can too. And that is why this moment is so dangerous for Trump politically and diplomatically. The aura of inevitability is fading. Analysts are observing that the White House still has not produced a major response after these legal blows. That silence matters because normally Trump responds instantly and aggressively, but now silence. And silence during a crisis usually means one thing: internal chaos, confusion, damage control, and emergency strategy meetings. Which again brings us back to why Pete Hoekstra was likely summoned back so suddenly. This administration is trying to figure out what comes next after its biggest leverage weapon started falling apart. This sudden recall of Pete Hoekstra is not just another diplomatic scheduling change. It is a flashing warning sign, a sign that the Trump administration understands its trade strategy is entering dangerous territory. The tariff wall that was supposed to intimidate the world is beginning to crack. The threats are losing power. The leverage is weakening. The courts are intervening. And countries like Canada are no longer backing down quietly. For months, Donald Trump projected absolute confidence against Canada. But tonight, Washington looks nervous. And when the superpower starts panicking, the entire world notices. If you enjoyed this breakdown and want more deep analysis on the growing political and economic battle between Canada and the United States, thank you so much for watching. We'll see you in the next one.